Welcome to another episode of How to Start, Grow and Monetize Your Podcast with him,
James Bird.
and me,
Alex Chisnell.
Thank you very much. And we're going to talk to you today about the number one marketing tip that you need for your podcast in 2025.
Now, obviously, there's loads and loads of marketing hacks and marketing tips that are working in the space right now. And there's a plethora. That's right, I'm dropping words like plethora of things that can work. But there is one thing that is performing above and beyond other stuff, especially if you're looking at organic growth for your podcast. And that is, and I hate to say this, guys, because you're going to go, oh, surely there's something else that's working right now. But there isn't. The best thing for your podcast in 2025 is short form content. Really? Is he still banging on about short form content in 2025? Yes, my friend, I am indeed, because that is the number one thing that's working right now. The battle for long form attention is being fought.
He loves this phrase.
In short form battlefields, and it still is true. I'm afraid it is true. The way for you to organically grow your podcast, the quickest right now, is short form content, and it is getting harder and harder and harder for it to cut through. But it is the way that people are organically finding out about shows. I had a chat to someone recently. They had a show that was stuck. They could not get it beyond 5,000-6,000 downloads per month. Just kept banging their head against a brick wall, doing the same thing. TikTok picked up for them. A couple of clips popped. Then everything else, therefore, after popped. And they're getting like 60,000-70,000 downloads per month now on a consistent basis. So the way to get your long-form content found in 2025 is via short-form content. Now, the number one way for people to buy into you as a brand and a business as an authority is long-form. Mm-hmm. So if you can hook them with the short-form stuff and then deliver real value with the long-form stuff, you can build tangible, valuable brand equity effectively with that ideal listener. But often the way that you find them in the first place is through short-form content.
And you could take, a short form clip, and by short form we probably mean under 60 seconds, okay? Yep. Just 60 seconds from a video of your podcast, okay? That short form video clip can be turned into shorts for YouTube, shorts now for Spotify as well, or one short per episode on Spotify. I'm sure that will change over time as well. TikToks for your TikTok, Reels for your Instagram. LinkedIn now has video clips on there as well.
Yep.
Facebook, Twitter. So you just take that one little thing, and you can put it across multiple platforms at the same time.
Yeah.
Again, it will come back to, where is your ideal listener hanging out in the biggest numbers, and where you can get traction. The other elements to that video clip, obviously, you need to put a title to it. You need to put a description to it. Ideally, you'd want to have subtitles on there. You might, look at your favorite podcast. There are going to be different styles of doing this, and it goes through different iterations, doesn't it, as to what's popular, what colors are being used, whether you're using emoji
thing was really popular, wasn't it, for a little while? It seems to have died off a little bit.
Very emoji-like now, I kind of think.
Yeah. But the other thing with the short form content, and to touch on the point that you made there, Al, is a lot of content makers get frustrated with how much stuff you got to do now to promote your podcast. This whole build it and they will come. I've got an amazing podcast with an amazing guest. No one's going to find it accidentally these days, because attention has never been lower. It's never been easier to make content. It's never been more difficult for that content to actually find an audience organically. So with that in mind, you can't just spend all of your time, effort and energy making a great podcast and expecting an audience to show up, unless you're a celebrity, in which case you maybe could put out one post about it per week and you could organically grow it. Or you might be the exception, the vast exception rather than the rule. But in the majority of instances, you have to spend as much time, effort and energy on the promotion of this thing as you do on the making of this thing. And on the plus side of short form content, exactly as you said there, one clip, the same clip, by the way, can work on TikTok, can work on YouTube Shorts, can work on LinkedIn, can work on Instagram, and can work on Facebook. So whilst it might be really annoying that you've now got to do all this marketing work around this podcast when you just want to focus on having an amazing 90-minute conversation with somebody who's got something to share, man, you can actually, with those clips, you can use it in a multitude of different places and spaces. Now, what I would suggest to make it easier for you as a content maker is to cut it underneath a certain level so that it will work on all those platforms. So if you keep it sub 60 seconds, it will work on all those different platforms. Where it used to be a right pain in the bum was you remember when LinkedIn did 20-second stories for a little while?
Yeah, they just
It's like, why would you do that? So Instagram, it had to be 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And then the next iteration was that you could upload up to a minute, but it would chop it into 4 15-minute segments. And then LinkedIn, in their infinite wisdom, for whatever reason, made it just a bit more difficult. So it's like you had to do it for 20 seconds, which I guess they did because they wanted it to be bespoke and made just solely for that platform. But I don't think anyone's going to be... Well, most content creators, business owners, entrepreneurs haven't got time to just make content just for LinkedIn Shorts. But if you keep it underneath 60 seconds, it will work on YouTube. It will work on all those different platforms. As soon as you go over the minute mark, it doesn't always work on, yes, you can upload it to YouTube, but it uploads it as a full video. It automatically knows it's a short if it's underneath 60 seconds. You could double check that on the URL. Because again, to start with, you had to hashtag it with short for it to appear as a short, but now you can actually see before you upload it and press publish or schedule, it will show you the URL and it shows you that it's youtube.com/shorts. You want to make sure that it is that, so it gets that benefit of the short platform. But just to give you an example with recent clips, I don't think we've had a clip that's got under 500 views from Start Growing Monetise Your Podcast
over the weekend.
Good numbers.
I know, good numbers for a brand new podcast.
Good numbers for a brand new podcast.
Absolutely.
And also, if you're clever with it in the right way, and this is what YouTube has done now, if you put the YouTube short up, you can now link the long form video that the short form clip came from.
Yeah.
So again, it shows that the platforms want you to be proactively using short form to drive attention to your longer form content.
And what it used to do on YouTube before that, you weren't able to do that recently, was that if somebody watched your short, you would then get served up with the long-term version of that.
Yes.
But then someone obviously might just go, no, I just prefer watching shorts. I prefer 60-second clips. But as you said right at the very start of this, if you can hook somebody in with a short and get them to listen to the longer form of your content, you can then embed them into your podcast brand, get them to know, like, and trust you, and ultimately do what you want them to do on your podcast. Which is what on this podcast? What do we want them to do?
Start a podcast?
Yes,
that'll do, won't it?
Yes,
start your podcast.
Start your podcast.
Do you know what, as well though, with the short form content, whilst it's a great marketing hack, a lot of people I've had conversations with only consume content from the short form. When you said that, it made me think about it. I've had loads of conversations with people like, I love your podcast.
Yeah.
I was like, are you a listener or a watcher? Yeah, I watch all your clips. I was like, isn't that interesting? And I know quite a few clients who've got the same thing, where the person who's consuming the content, they still love the podcast, but they don't actually watch or listen to the full thing.
No.
They're just looking at the clips.
Yeah.
Now, in one sense, as a content maker, I'm like, well, I only make the clips to make you listen to the full thing. But actually, if they're deriving value and enjoyment from the short format version of it, it's not just a marketing hack. It's actually how some people consume the content.
Yeah, well, I think I might have mentioned this before to you, but it was when I had a meeting with someone, and the question they asked me was, does it matter if somebody doesn't watch or listen to the actual podcast? And I was like, what do you mean? What if they just look at the clips on social media? And I was like, okay, that's actually a really good question. And ultimately, that comes down to, what are you looking to do with the podcast? What is the goal? If you're just looking to spread brand awareness on social media, then brilliant. You've just created brand awareness on social media because somebody's watched all your clips. But if you're trying to embed them into your ecosystem and ultimately sell them a widget that they've listened to your podcast at the end of the 60-minute episode, then no, that's not going to work. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it goes back to with the... What does success look like for your podcast is a question that we always ask about the podcast in general. In this instance here, you could break it down even finer and say, what does clip success look like for your podcast marketing? So like I say, is it that you want to spread brand awareness? Is it that you want to be considered as an authority? Is it that, like, for example, I know we talk about him all the time, Chris Williamson, he now shares out other people's clips of his podcast. So there's lots of like clip making platforms. I don't know whether he's sometimes got an affiliate with them or something like that, but there'll be someone who's made a podcast, taken a clip, put some like emotive music behind it and subtitled it, but he actually shares that himself. So in that instance there, not only is he making short form clips to promo his podcast, but someone else is taking, and obviously his content is around mindset, motivation, inspiration, aspiration, sort of like positive psychology, success, habits, and all that kind of stuff. So it is more clicky than, we've got a podcast that we do for our clients about the AI in the pharmaceutical industry. You're not going to get someone clickbait farming AI pharmaceutical clips, but in that instance they're actually, it's not only spreading awareness of his podcast directly, but he's actually hijacking somebody else's audience because they're making their own content from his sub-content.
Yeah, it's just reminded me of when you see a musician or a band and they're sharing on their stories people's clips of the gig where they are playing or DJing. And like you say, it's that exact same thing. They're building that brand awareness. They're hijacking that other person's audience because they've tagged them, then they've shared that. Growth exponential.
Yeah, user-generated content. There's a podcast that I listened to over Christmas that got launched. Rochelle Humes, who is formerly of the Saturday's TV presenter, etc., etc. She launched a podcast. Really, really good. It definitely wasn't aimed at my demographic because it's called Ladies That Launch. But I saw it. I like the artwork and I listened to the little trailers. I was like, they're doing a trailer. Really good title. And I listened to the trailers. Like, that's interesting. They do a trailer and an episode, which is what we tell a lot of our clients to do, which is launch multiple episodes. I was like, how are they formatting the trailers? And I listened to it, and it actually probably hooked me in. I was like, that's really cool. And then pretty much their entire feed for the podcast itself, which I think had grown from 0 to 10,000 followers within a couple of weeks, which, she's a celebrity.
Yeah,
she's very well known. You're going to expect that for the podcast channel itself. But then all it was user-generated content. All of their stories was other people sharing how much they'd enjoyed the show. So that's the other thing that you think with when you're making a clip, when you're making short-form content, it's not just potentially going to reach the ecosystem of the people that you've got. If you can get other people to share it, and maybe you turn it into some sort of a competition or a giveaway or whatever. But if you make content that people actually want to consume or even want to share because of how it positions them, however, then you potentially hijacking other people's audience, which is drawing people back to your podcast as well. There's a bunch of stuff you can do in 2025, paid ads, show notes, optimization, blogs, shared blogs, partnerships with other podcasters, YouTube hacks. But the number one, whether we like it or not, the number one thing...
Until it changes,
which by the time you listen to this probably will have, because it'll be 2 weeks later. But short form content is still the number one driver of organic traffic for long form platforms and long form pieces of content.
Here endeth the lesson. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button if you're watching. Click the follow button if you're listening on audio. And then go, start, grow, and monetize your own podcast.